at Penn State University, Harvard University, and the University of Pittsburgh. After the publication of her novel Fieldwork in Ukrainian Sex in 1996, which in 2006 was named the most influential Ukrainian book for the 15 years of Ukrainian independence. She has been a freelance author ever since, and her recent work, Journey 2022, a book-long essay on the cultural and historical background of the current Russo-Ukrainian War, won in Ukraine the Book of the Year and has been translated into 9 languages. She is the recipient of the Antonovich Prize in 2009, the Angelos Award in 2019, the Shevchenko National Prize in 2019, a Women in Arts Award in 2020, and in 2023 was named to the BBC's 100 Women list. Before I turn the floor over to our keynote speaker, let me note that we are recording. You should have seen that already. We are recording this presentation, as we have been all the sessions, and that we expect to have about 20 to 30 minutes. We had a little conversation before we started about keeping to the time, and I'll do my best to remind our speaker close to the end about where she is, just so she doesn't have to watch the clock. And so we think about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes for questions at the end. So write them down and save them up. And with that, all those things said, let me ask you all to please welcome on your screens. She's going to be a little claustrophobic, looking at only herself for all this time. So maybe you can actually say it aloud. Welcome to our speaker, Oksana Zabuzhko.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's really a big pleasure to be with you, even though online. To be able to join your conference, even at such a long distance. I have to apologize that I might be a little bit out of tune today because, as you may know, if you are following the news, we were having a very troublesome night. There was a massive Russian missile and shell attack, so the night was mostly sleepless. It is also, a part of a presentation when you have, Ukrainians talking about their culture being heard in the West. Unfortunately, it was not until the sounds of bombs and shelling became resonant worldwide that our culture made itself heard as well, or rather started to make itself heard as well. And that's more or less the subject of my today's topic, Ukrainian culture, 2 years of decolonization. Why 2 years and why not earlier? Okay, I'm going to dwell upon this a little bit largely later on. But just for the beginning, to give you some food for rumination, I think I should remind you about the last week events. I'm sure you all were following. The most resonant sample of the Ukrainian cultural presentation in the West, our first Oscar in Ukrainian history. And the whole story around it, which is worth probably a separate essay and a separate cultural analysis, along with its text and context. I'm sure you all were, you all saw you all were watching the ceremony. At least Ukrainians were definitely watching 45 seconds of Mstislav Chernov, the director of 20 Days in Mariupol speech. The speech was brilliant. All Ukraine was happy. Well, until in the night of the same day, it appeared that Disney Entertainment, that was responsible for the shortened international version of the Oscar Awards ceremony, um, cut out the 20 days in Mariupol, but under the pretext that they they have chosen not to broadcast the documentary feature before. So it took Ukrainians days of protest. First, there was Suspilne, the public TV that protested. Then there was an official protest on the side. There was a letter on the side of the Ukraine Film and TV Committee. I'm always confusing the titles of these important government organizations. Well, but so in the end, the Disney agreed to restore Mstislav Chernov's Wien part in this international version. So everyone was happy, and the reason, the argument that Ukrainian side used was that last year they were not cutting out the documentary part, which was the film about Naval. So there was a suspicion about the privileges that the Disney Entertainment showed in this case, and of course, like no one wanted this, this unpleasant political implications. That Navalny's story is more important than the Mariupol story, as Russian story is still more important than the Ukrainian story. This sounds not quite politically correct after 2 years of decolonization, and that's how the truth was restored. So it seems to be the end of the story, but not until you take a broad look on the map of Ukrainian cultural presentations at the same time, because exactly on the same days when the story was happening in France, there was another film festival, well, a minor one, called Une autre Russie. It's already the 10th edition of this festival. So for 10 years, the festival under the title Different Russia or Another Russia, the festival of a Russian film, is occurring in France, in a couple of cities usually. There was also a scandal there, as this year festival of the Russian film, Une autre Russie, Different Russia, Another Russia, was presented by the retrospect of Otar Ioseliani, the Georgian actually film director, the retrospect of Larisa Shepitko, the Ukrainian-born director, Soviet director, the same way as Ioseliani. And most interestingly, The Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors by Sergei Parajanov, well, to celebrate the centennial, the 100th anniversary since Parajanov's birth. The Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors is the classic of Ukrainian so-called poetic cinema. It is one of the most illustrious pages in, if not the most illustrious one in the history of the Ukrainian film. The 60s, the whole list of the whole filmography of the Ukrainian poetic cinema does not extend, I think, 10 positions or something, but it all started with The Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, with the film version of Mikhailo Kotsubinski's novella. It's not a novel, it's a novella. And yes, it's been the big rebirth of not only of Ukrainian film, but of Ukrainian culture altogether, Ukrainian spirit, whatever, anything Ukrainian. The brilliant debut, the brilliant constellation of filmmakers who were the stars and so on and so forth. So all this was demonstrated, under the label Russian film. And this, of course, it is a perfect example of cultural appropriation, which Russians have always been very good at, as Mr. Putin has recently proved in his famous or notorious interview, given to Tucker Carlson, of which Tucker Carlson did not get a word. What was that? Something happened. Am I heard?
You are. We just had one person who had their mic on, and it was a little accident.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So Tucker Carlson totally misunderstood Mr. Putin. In this case, I am on Putin's side. He did make his point, which Carlson, as an American, totally missed. So I say it's a perfect example of a cultural misunderstanding. Putin gave a perfect sample, a case study, I would say, of a cultural appropriation. It was not just lecturing some stupid, irrelevant, lecture on Russian history. It was a lecture on how Russia appropriated Ukrainian history and making a point that in no way, by no means, he would give it back. And yes, that's one of the major reasons of this war. It is for Russia, it is the war for identity. Because a reappropriation, Ukraine's reappropriation of its history would leave Russia with a totally ruined identity. And Putin made this point. So appropriation is an art, but what is interesting, there was a letter coming back, to this example, to this French example. There was a letter from the Ukrainian embassy, the letter of protest, which the organizers responded with some elusive answers. But interestingly and noteworthy in the context of my subject is that the French reviewers, the French press, the French media, the French side, so to speak, altogether, well, did not take a hint of the scandal. Like, yes, they were buying all that. They were buying all these Georgian and Ukrainian films as Russian film. And that's something which is always in the background. We still have to fight in all these presentations of Ukrainian culture in the West. We still have to keep in mind this third part, so to speak, in the background, which is the inseparable participant of our dialogue with the Western audience. It did not start under Mr. Putin. It did not even start under the Soviets. It starts earlier. It started much earlier in the Tsarist times. I wouldn't go that far, but some brief historical review of the situation I would like to give you, starting with the quotation, which I'm not going, the source of which I'm not going to reveal you. I propose that you guess what year it was said. Okay? And those who guess, okay, you can you can write your guesses and I'll see them on the screen. I hope so. I hope my computer works well. Okay, so the quotation. Within the past few months, Ukraine, a nation unknown to the West, has come into the forefront of the world's attention. Most people, I think, are prepared to say that they know little or nothing about it. For this deficiency in knowledge, they need not blame themselves. There are good reasons for it. The suppressors of Ukraine took care that she be unknown. They indeed denied that she even existed. It would be difficult to imagine anything more reprehensible than the silencing of a nation which by ancient right belongs to the European family of nations. But uncontrollable events have now brought Ukraine into the international arena. Okay, any guesses? I don't see. Studies, yes. Bravo. Bravo. Yeah, bravo. Yeah, the quotation belongs
I simply
to
was
British.
lucky to read you on Facebook and you already quoted this, so it was again.
Okay, so I did publish it on Facebook once again, and yeah, and you are following me on Facebook. Okay, thank you. Yes, it belongs to British journalist Lancelot Lawton, who during the 30s, with this smog of totalitarianism thickening over Europe, was trying to open the eyes of the British public to the importance of the so-called Ukrainian question in the forthcoming and unavoidable, as he wisely foresaw, battles in Eastern Europe. Lancelot Lawton he was a British journalist, and he delivered a special address on this Ukrainian issue in the House of Commons in 1939. Alas, his message passed unheard. The West completely missed his Ukrainian lesson and crossed Ukraine off its list for many decades to come. Nor did the reappearance of the country on the political map in 1991 help to make us more recognizable. There was simply no room for Ukraine's story in the Western narrative as long as the Russian story was going unrevised. And Ukraine existed until the very date of the full-scale invasion, that is, until February 24, 2022, Ukraine existed on the periphery of Western imagination, like a bleak suburb of Great Russia, or even another quotation, Russia's legitimate backyard. This expression, which although half jokingly was used during the discussion held as recently as January 2022 by a British media whose name I'm not going to mention here, nomina sunt odiosa. The only reason I followed was that I was invited to join the exciting discussion of two British intellectuals on how to groom my country's constitution to please Mr. Putin better. And the editor who sent me an invitation to join was obviously completely unaware of how arrogantly imperialistic this might sound to my ear. And yes, they were using this term, Russia's backyard, like Putin will not be happy to see NATO's rockets in his legitimate backyard. And it really, sent cold along my spine um, because that was literally the language which was used by the European press back in the 30s. Only at that time, it was in an attempt to pacify Hitler. So the question, what did we learn from history? What did we learn from the lessons of the World War II, from Holocaust, from this whole, never again business that we repeat regularly and on which the libraries of books were written? Well, this is the question no writer or intellectual or cultural activist, can keep out of her mind. And the answers are mostly pessimistic. Yes, we missed a lot from the history lessons, and what is happening now is the price we are paying for these missed lessons. So that's in a way, a perfect example to what extent our world is being run by arrogance and ignorance. But coming closer to our times, well, I'm not discussing. Probably I should have made this remark at the very beginning. I'm not going to discuss the inner problems that Ukrainian culture was having in its development through these 30 years of independence, the major of which was the lack of uh, any consistent cultural politics. And well, that's maybe, I can't on an open mic in the end, when we'll be having a free discussion and I'll be able to dwell upon that a little bit. But basically, in this talk, I'm going to focus on the issue of cultural presentation and how this decolonization in the eyes of the West is happening, and what handicaps and obstacles are in front of us on that way, on both sides, on Ukrainian and Western. To give you a very brief recap sequence from our century, from the 21st century. I have to say that what never failed to intrigue me was that now, that is, with the big war, it is the third time that Ukraine is, to use Lancelot Lawton's words, brought into the international arena. It's becoming a subject of the worldwide attention. The third time in 20 years. The first time was in 2004. That was the Orange Revolution. And that was, I would say, the first Western discovery of Ukraine as a separate entity. A very pleasant discovery until 2004, all the news from Ukraine were reported to the Western media by Moscow correspondents. So everything was done through the Russian mediation. Ukraine was not even having a voice of its own, apart from the embassy. That was a huge wave of interest. That was the discovery that, wow, this new country in transition, some gray zone, some strange appearance on the political map is something different from Russia. It has a strong civil society. It is capable to fight for democracy. How very interesting. And this also causes a wave of interest in this country's culture. The problem was that by then there was one and only Ukrainian book, well, to a certain extent, I would say, available in English, which surprised Westerners, smashed with this news from previously unknown countries could have read. That was, please don't laugh, A Short History of Tractors in Ukrainian by Marina Levitsky. That was the breakthrough in Marina Levitsky's career, but I can't say it was a breakthrough for Ukrainian literature. Though that was the beginning, I would say, for international careers, rather limited, but still for a couple of writers, well, until recently, I would say there were like 3 or 4 of us, and you all know the names. Kurkov, Zabuzhko, Zhadan, Andruchovich, Zabuzhko, Zhadan, Kurkov. Okay, you can, change order and, well, different level of popularity in different countries for each of the above mentioned but somehow for the international market, that was enough. You know, if you have Ukraine, okay, for every country, one or two authors to be presented as the voice of this country. If something is happening, something newsworthy is happening in this country, please note the word newsworthy. Newsworthy is not yet being known. Newsworthy is just being in the news. And the interest to something newsworthy does not last long. Cultural visibility is something different than being newsworthy. So the first time when Ukraine was newsworthy due to Maidan, it lasted, well, like I would say, for about a year. And then the attention somehow gradually shifted northwards. The tone of the Western articles, of the Western experts, was changing more or less to the if the Ukrainians could fight for democracy so stubbornly and win, so will be able Russians soon. So the Moscow Maidan must be around the corner. Why? Well, no logic for the Ukrainians, but for the Western awareness, well, that was quite understandable. If the Ukrainians could, well, then in Russia things also will be better one day. Because Ukrainians and Russians were still seen as some, well, fraternal nations, not fraternal nations. You know, this discourse that Putin is using now to justify his genocidal war against Ukraine. Well, this discourse comes from these fraternal nations or cousin nations with that share similar history, that share 1,000 years of common history, which is a total, well, chutzpah, I would say. Well, but this chutzpah has been for sale for generations, and what is being in action for generations is usually taken for truth, and this is the law of propaganda, you know, known since the Nazi Germany. So the truth repeated many times, the lie repeated many times stops being lie. So the second round of this Ukraine being known came in 2014. The second Maidan, the Euromaidan, the Revolution of Dignity. This time, you know, with the blood spilled and with the Russian aggression that made itself visible, but which did not ring, you know, the alarm bell in the awareness of the Western decision makers. Well, and yes, this left, I would say, Ukrainian cultural presentation on the level of, you know, a number of more or less translated this, you know, 4 or 5 or half a dozen at best translated authors. But no matter what a number of translated authors, it does not give a notion of a literature. Because even when appearing now on the international stage, we were doomed to remain at best half understood. like tongue-tied cripples, because the cultural context we belong to was remaining invisible to the non-Ukrainian public. I remember, if I'm allowed to refer to my personal experience here, when I was asked to name by my American publisher in a question in the Amazon authors questionnaire, which works in my genre I admire and envision as my predecessors. So I named The Man Without Qualities by Robert Musil, the Alexandria Quartet by Lawrence Darrow, and Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman, after some thinking. But I had to skip my number one on the list, which was the tetralogy Richinsky Sisters by the Ukrainian prose writer Irina Vilde, from whom I first learned how major historical events could be depicted from a woman's standpoint. My Ukrainian literary mothers were not included in international reference book, and there was no point in trying to explain yourself by means of another unknown. And later, reading an enthusiastic review of my novel that was about the Museum of Abandoned Secrets by an American critic, I came across a line which was supposed to be a compliment, a high praise for my work, but which for me sounded like a slap in the face, literally. This all, I mean, there was a big laudation to my novel, what a great work, a great piece of art is that, and everything. And then this line, this is especially impressive because as far as my ignorant mind was concerned, it came out of nowhere. And that was really, really painful and humiliating. Being received, like a poor Cinderella on the ball appearing from nowhere, rather than an author who comes from a long tradition of a modern novel and who actually is supposed to make this tradition visible by my own work. And but speaking, now on what is colonial attitude and what is post-colonial attitude. Well, it's actually the law of, I would say, the law of marketing. Once a work of art is taken out of its legitimate market space, like from an illuminated window case, art becomes as good as non-existent. And on the international stage, the game, at least in literature, is ruled by English. It is a linguistic hard currency for the global village. So it is not about what is good. It is what was translated, what is available into English, and this in English. And this reviewer was obviously sure that if he could not find any Ukrainian novels in English translation, it means that they did not exist. Because if they existed, they would have been translated into English if they were worth it. He did not have any other solution to this puzzle of my coming out of nowhere. And yes, he had like from his standpoint, he had all the good reason to think so, because well, being born in English, yes, you have the privilege, to have a privilege to choose what to read. Well, and while me, I keep asking myself once in a while, from time to time, what if the book which can change my life has already been written by some kindred spirit in, say, I don't know, Albanian or Malayalam or Swahili? My chances to ever come across it are close to nil. On the international stage, every author's publicity depends on that of his or her country. No one is going to read some guy with an unpronounceable name if his country never appears in the top news feature unless for reports on natural disasters or wars. That's why I think, okay, we started later. Yeah, we started later. I still have.
We started a little, yeah, we started a little bit late. You still have easily 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Okay. Well, that was an introduction. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So I'll try to be more concise. Um, so, okay. I'll be skipping. I'll be skipping some juicy examples, uh, some juicy parts. That's why I think the turning point of decolonizing Ukraine in the view of the Western media and broadly speaking Western reception came when the Guardian that was covering for nearly a year the events at the Ukrainian front line, changing correspondence every 2 weeks, agreed at the suggestion of the Ukrainian guide to send for a change a correspondent from a culture department. Charlotte Higgins came to Ukraine first time as a correspondent in the fall 2022, and since then she comes more or less on a regular basis. And like they were having, with the editor, they were having, this conversation that, yeah, okay, we are covering the war, but this is a big country, still about 30 million people living there, most of them going on with their normal daily life. And okay, haunted by war, yes, but still the life is going on, and the cultural development of the country under these conditions is also maybe also worth attention, especially as so little is known to the British audience, to the British readership about Ukrainian culture. And this reports from the Ukrainian cultural scene, which became regular. Well, I think present a very refreshing attempt to turn newsworthiness into cultural visibility. Because so far, what what mostly is making Ukrainian culture visible in these past 2 years of the big war is again the damage caused by the Russian aggression to Ukrainian cultural heritage. This month, UNESCO confirmed that Russians had caused damage to 346 cultural sites. According to the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine, it's over 2,000 cultural sites, but they count also objects of cultural infrastructure like houses of culture, movie theaters, and so on. But among those listed by them both, by UNESCO and by Ukrainian Ministry, there are some being on Ukraine's tentative list of the World Heritage Sites, such as the gems of the 11th century church architecture in Chernihiv, the celebrated constructivist skyline of Kharkiv's city center. Um, so, so this is, I would say, something which is being discussed as a part of the war crimes performed by the Russian army in Ukraine. But still, I can't say that it increases cultural visibility. Like I remember in spring 2022, when there was a threat that the Russians might start attacking St. Sophia Cathedral in Kyiv. I was then screaming hysterically in every interview, and I was given up to 10 interviews daily in that period. I was screaming that there is a threat to St. Sophia, and mostly seeing black faces in response. That was all the more striking and teaching in the same time experience. That I remember only too well how shocked everyone was 3 years before, when in Paris Notre Dame Cathedral was on fire, and how personal this was for everyone who belongs to the European culture. I mean, it might have been, your personal experience of your wandering in Paris and taking pictures of this cathedral, or it might have been musical, it might have been Hugo's novel, whatever. I mean, we all have our own Notre Dame. We all have our own Notre Dame Cathedral, which is part of our personal experience. It is a personified version of culture. That's what culture is. That's when it becomes visible, when it is experienced on this personal level by an individual. While San Sofia, I mean, I could have been, telling until I was getting blue in the face about how important it is and how it is the one and only and unique monument of the survived monument of the ancient Byzantine architecture constructed before the before Christianity was split into Western and Eastern, 100 years earlier, before Notre Dame in the Notre Dame Cathedral, and but still, it is invisible. It is somewhere in Ukraine, and Ukraine is where is Ukraine? Ukraine is Russia's legitimate backyard, and unless unless this personal experience, this personal contact is taking place, and it should take place, on a regular basis, and with with a full understanding of cultural and historical contexts surrounding this work, this piece of work. Then we still will be overshadowed by the Russian story, and Tucker Carlson will be listening to Putin and saying that it was irrelevant but interesting. Yeah. Well, then again, one more thing. What changed? What changed after February 24? What changed with the beginning of the big war, and why it's about decolonization now? Some Again, there is a very unpleasant moment, which uh, which which unfortunately, has to be stressed here. That yes, there is an unquestionable preference in readership for writers who represent powerful countries. I'd like to quote some German politician of the 19th century, but back then in what was later described by historians as the age of nationalism. Particularly popular were the discussions on where to draw the line between a language and a dialect. And this guy claimed that language is a dialect with an army and a navy. It is not just a witty formula, there is more behind it than we would like to know. The fact is that only after Ukraine, as opposed to the expectations of all the world experts who were giving us from 72 to 94 hours to stay against the second biggest army in the world. Only after we won the battle for Kiev and the second biggest army in the world appeared to be, as some American general said, only the second army in Ukraine. Only after that, I must say, the interest of the interest towards our historical contexts, our backgrounds, our traditions, what we come from, and how different we are from Russians, and why are we fighting so courageously, and why don't we want, to be with them in one country and to fight for democracy together. All these questions appeared to be beneficial for the Ukrainian classics, first and foremost. Even though our first Oscar was, for what is newsworthy, for what is still on the front lines, though pushed back now by the new war. There is always some new war. There is always, the newsreel changes constantly. Cultural visibility doesn't. Newsworthiness, well, is shaky. So after October 7th, there is war in Gaza, which becomes more topical and pushes war in Ukraine, from the front pages. Well, but this interest into interest in our context, interest in our history, interest in our being different from Russians on the more profound level than having different political culture, having civil society, unlike Russians, and other things that were discussed in the press on this very superficial level. This finally comes into being, and here I can give you a very personal example, which is very dear to my heart. Like for 10 years before the Russian full-scale invasion, I've been trying to convince both European and American theater directors, whomever I could lay my hand on, to do the stage version of Cassandra by Lesya Ukrainian. I was lecturing extensively at every opportunity, including 2 hours monologue at wine or coffee, explaining that there is no more topical piece of literature, no more topical drama in the entire European literature for this decade. The drama all permeated with the premonition, with the sense, not premonition, but the sense of ending for Belle Époque, because it was written in 1908, written by a woman intellectual who, unlike most of her European colleagues, was very much aware, probably by virtue of her being Ukrainian, belonging to this suppressed nation, that the Belle Époque is coming to an end, and the big collapse, the grand catastrophe, is already at the door. And her Cassandra, of course, is her alter ego. Her version of the Trojan War, told from Cassandra's name. Cassandra is the protagonist of the Trojan War. Cassandra is this intellectual who sees and is helpless, who can't stop the war. And in the same time, around her, the life is going on. Troy is having its banquets, its corruption, its petty squabbles, small issues of human pettiness and everything. And her antagonist, her twin brother, who is also a prophet, but unlike her, successful, Helen, teaches her as a first-class politician, or as I would say, the politician of class of Berlusconi or Putin or Trump for that matter. He teaches her the rules of populism, how to be loved by the crowd, how to be loved, how to be popular, how to be trusted. Just tell them what they want to hear. Tell them what is useful, what is profitable. Make an impression. He teaches her how to make an impression, how to make a presentation, uh, absolute, the basic lessons of populism. Okay, I'd rather, stop here because, okay, I risk again, plunging into uh, 2 hours soliloquy about how topical Cassandra is. So it lasted like for literally for over 10 years. And I was trying to convince, my interlocutors who were showing some interest in Ukrainian culture that Cassandra is something really designed for today's age. Everyone was saying, "Oh, very interesting. Oh, yeah, I'll look for it. Or how how interesting." And some were making notes and so on, but nothing came out of it until until the Ukrainian army won Kyiv and Putin's blitzkrieg failed um, shamefully, and half a year after, Cassandra was finally, for the first time, presented on the stage of Theatre Omnibus in London, in translation by Nina Murray, who also translated My Museum of Abandoned Secrets, and got reaction like uh, I I read it in the internet, like, wow, how topical, how amazing, why we did not know it before, and so on and so forth. So as I keep saying, we are all beneficiaries of the victories of the Ukrainian army nowadays, in these 2 years. It may sound cynical and unpleasant, but unfortunately this is the case. And if we go back to the okay,
Oksana.
I'm appearing. Yeah, I'm approaching the finale.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, uh, so so coming back, to what I began with uh, to- coming back to this 20 days in Mariupol. I can't um, I can't but keep thinking of one more killing in Mariupol, which uh, back then has passed unnoticed and didn't find its place in the film. Mariupol used to boast two mosaics by Alla Horska, the leading Ukrainian monumental artist of the 60s, a woman of a great talent and also of a great spirit, which had determined her tragic fate in the Soviet times. Um, she was defiant and uncompromising and was assassinated by the KGB in one of those uninvestigated cases which were not at all uncommon among Ukrainian intellectuals and cultural elites in the years of the individual terror or the suffocated Renaissance, as the Soviet 70s are sometimes dubbed in Ukrainian history. He recognized masterpieces, The Tree of Life and Boreviter, both 1967, were decorating one of Mariupol restaurants. And 55 years later, and 52 years after Horska's death, Russian terrorist state led by the former KGB officer turned the works of the once assassinated dissident artist into rubble with a couple of missiles, thus killing Alla Horska for the second time, even though not physically present among people of Mariupol. So the question is very practical for me. Is it possible that where Horska's story for the past half a century included into all the world textbooks on art history of the 20th century, then Mariupol mosaics could have survived? I don't have an answer to this question, but I prefer to believe they would. Otherwise, whatever we all do with our books and our universities would make no sense at all. And now that would be Putin's true victory. I am what I'm trying to do is oops. Okay, so that's the tree of life. That's the tree of life, and that's Borevita. Tree of life and Borevita, and that's what left. Borevita, and that's what left of the tree of life. Irreplaceable. The okay, thank you very much. And sorry for sorry if I took
We're fine. We have about 15 minutes for questions and
We are
discussion.
fine, yeah? Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Let's please all give a round of applause visibly to our presenter for the day.
Thank you.
And yes, we do have a little time for questions, and we can you can speak up if you have them. Please remember we have the translators working, the interpreters working, so you can use Ukrainian if you prefer. Please raise your hand, or you can put your question in the chat. Anybody who would like to do that, please go ahead.
No questions.
You know, there's one here from Elena.
Excuse me, I have a question. You listen to me?
I can't hear anything.
Yeah, we can't. I'm afraid we can't hear you, Ksenia.
Yes, it's me.
No. No, it's not coming through. Your audio is breaking up.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm Seneca Constituent Culture Dragon. Maybe I can write. Yes, the dragon.
Okay, I think she's going to try to ask in the chat. Olena, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you so much. So is it okay, this connection, the sound connection this time?
You're good, yes.
Thank you so much. But first of all, allow me to express my gratitude for such really touching talk. And I will try to be very quickly with my question. So I was especially impressed with your personal story with Irina Vildes Sestra-Ryczynski, her novel. So thank you so much for sharing it, and also for this brilliant interpretation of Oksana Zabuzhko, sorry, Lesa Ukrainka, but I think it's remarkable. Lesa Ukrainka Cassandra. Yes, because it's like, as for me, it's not only Lesa Ukrainka, it's also about your reading of this text. So my question is, when we are talking about our general literary tradition, Ukrainian literary tradition, do you have some ideas? What should be our general intention, or could be our general intention when talking our tradition? And what could this tradition tell interested readers about themselves? I mean, interested readers, Western readers, as global reading audience. Do you have any general idea about this intention, why it is important, not only for understanding Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian literature, but for understanding themselves, or I would say ourselves as global reading community?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Elena. But well, I'm sorry to say that, but in this situation, we are, I would say, we are in different camps. You talk like and think like a literary critic. You systematize, you generalize, you want an essence. I think in terms of um, author's world, and I think in terms of personalities. And for me, literature is a constellation of personalities, some of whom can be more convincing nowadays for the Westerners, some less. Well, and yes, I more or less know how to explain Shevchenko, who is extremely poorly translated, maybe untranslatable at all, but on the level of his, life biography, personality, yes, I know how to explain him. Also through his, similarities with Emily Dickinson's poetry. Well, there are certain parallels and everything. Well, I know how to talk about Lesa Ukrainka, how to present Lesa Ukrainka, and I insist that no history of European literature, no history of women's literature would ever be complete without her works. At least, half of her 20 dramas should be translated, staged, and assimilated by every Western culture. And only then, it will become clear, how much was missed, what lacune there has been all this time in European women's writings. Well, I can, speak in terms of. I'm very happy, by the way, that another success, that the success of Ukrainian army under Kiev helped the success of Valerian Pidmoheny in Europe. The translation, the German translation by his Misto, the city, appeared right in time. It came out by the end of 22, and yes, it was a big success. It was a big discovery, and all the German critics were were happy to put this novel on the list of this forgotten modernist classic. It's a trend now, this forgotten modernist classic. So Podmogilny fit the picture ideally, so to speak. And after this German success, he is now being translated in a number of other countries. I don't know about. He's translated into English actually, but he was translated into English. But I think it is archived somewhere, in Toronto, Ukrainian by Toronto Ukrainian Studies. There was no publisher. Maybe now there will be, some, I don't know.
It's in open access right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, but that's a shame, that's really a shame. So in Europe, Podmogilny is now, having a second life, and Domontovich is being reopened, so to speak. And that's something which helps to see, this 20s, 1920s, this I would say Red Weimar of Ukraine, this very brief period um, of our Ukrainization, so to speak, when Ukrainian political and cultural elites were believing that Ukraine was independent and soon the whole world will become, the union of socialist republics, will turn into the union of the socialist republics. And this Ukrainian vanguard of this period, Ukrainian vanguard of the 20s, Ukrainian literature of this period, Ukrainian film of this period. Well, that's something which works like a clockwork. Because it is very Ukrainian, and at the same time it is real vanguard, juicy, nice pre-existential vanguard, which resonates very well with the mentality of the post-war Europe of the time. And yes, it shows, especially, when you go on with the story and say that all these young geniuses were shot, 10 years after. And we call it a short renaissance, this period. Well, that also makes an impression. So yes, I would think in these terms, not in terms of a general literary tradition, but in terms of periods, personalities, in terms of maybe certain ideological trends, like for instance, when uh, when speaking, of this decolonization, I'm sorry for my maybe, have ironic usage of the term, but I happened to see a couple of programs of very um, of very well well known, if not illustrious, Slavic centers. There were these conferences on decolonization, which with all these, subjects formulated, topics formulated, uh, well, to meet this standard. And it is really like every fashion, it really sounds, well, I would say, I take it, with some grain of irony, because decolonization is going to be much more, I'm afraid, um, well, time devouring process. Um, uh, well, but but in terms of ideological trends, it really works. When you speak um, about the about tradition started that, yes, like unlike there was just a situation, uh, when I was explaining that I belong to the different tradition than Russian literature with its imperialistic descriptions of Caucasus and other subjugated countries. That I belong to the tradition in which the first anti-colonial poem in European literature was written at that time, Caucasus by Shevchenko. And this tradition was then inherited by Lesya Ukrainka, who wrote one word and this ballad, long ballad on two Chukchas in the Russian army who committed a suicide. This a long and tragic poem. Nothing you won't read about these works in Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak's analysis. But I mean, that's been written in 1901. And yes, it is worth analysis in all post-colonial studies because this is taking part of the decolonized, of the subjugated, the part of the subaltern. It is about the voice of the subaltern, and it is this, white aristocratic woman who at the same time identifies herself as a Ukrainian with the subaltern because she is subaltern. And this experience actually is unique and it is quite efficient for post-colonial analysis. I think that's something which should be very productive for literary criticism in the forthcoming years. Like this, here, there, but I can't give, one answer to your question. A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Thank you. It looks like we're very, very close to our time, and there's another panel that's about to start at 10:30. There was a question in the chat. I hope you can answer maybe separately to Ksenia, who had a question about she's teaching in Padova, and then I see that Petro has a question as well. But I just don't think we're going to have time to do it if we give everybody a little bit of a break before you start up again in 2 minutes for the 10:30 panel.
Okay.
So I'm sorry about the time constraint, but it is very difficult to keep us all on track. And let me thank everyone again for their participation, and especially our speaker Oksana Zabuzhko. And if you can all show your appreciation somehow on screen so that she can see, that would be very great. And we'll take a very brief thank you again, Oksana.
Thank you.
For a wonderful presentation. We'll take a
Thank
very
you very
brief reprieve here for a minute or two, and then we'll start up shortly.